So storytelling is part of a unique human experience, and stories then have been with us really since the beginning of time. So what is digital storytelling, and how do digital stories differ from these kinds of stories that we are used to in our daily lives? There's a very simple and straightforward definition for a digital story, which is the art of telling stories with digital tools. And for what I've noticed recently is that digital storytelling has somehow become a rather big business in the world, and that you can spread your brand, whatever it is that you're trying to sell, through storytelling in this digital age. I think we can probably say that digital storytelling is a relatively recent curriculum innovation, and that the purpose for telling digital stories, certainly more generally, is that we want to try to be inclusive and distinctive in the stories that we tell, and that they're always stories that are about meaning making and about trying to understand our worlds from a personal point of view. Sometimes these stories can be transformational in their content and in their purposes, and all about understanding what we do and what others do and experience as well. However, the educative values and benefits of digital storytelling are still trying to be worked out. And I don't think that we really are close to understanding why digital storytelling might be a useful thing to do, especially in a school context. And so what I want to do is to try to show you how this might work, and then say something a bit later about what these educative values might be. So we know that change in society can be very disruptive, and it can also be disturbing. Yet, people will argue, and I think this is what we want to say, is that digital storytelling is a way for us to take control of the situations that we find ourselves in. And through this process of trying to understand our lives, we can, in fact, make differences that matter in our lives and in the world. And I'll show you an example of how that might work. But there's an issue. The issue is this, is that some stories are heard and they're understood, but others are not. And we all have stories to tell, and we can actually argue that our lives are just one big story. But some people's stories matter more than others. And other people don't get to tell their stories. And even when they do, I'm sure if you watch the news, you will know that this to be true in our present circumstances. Their stories don't get heard, and if they are heard, they get disparaged very quickly. What we want to try and do in our work as researchers and educators is try to put the storyteller back into the storytelling process. So there's the story content, and then there's the act of storytelling. What we want to try to do is to insert the role and the place of the storyteller between those two things. We want to try to create as well, educationally, safe, trusting and exploratory learning environments where storytelling can occur. This seemed to me, when I was writing this, to be a very simple thing to say, but a lot harder to try and make happen, simply because of many of the things that we hold sacred almost about what stories are and who gets to tell their stories. So I want to show you an example of a story that was made by one of our students in a study that we conducted. We'll call him Tommy for the sake of trying to protect his identity. And here's some information about how Tommy's story was constructed. We went on a field trip. The task was this, was using the resources and the materials that they collected when they were on the visit to Clark Quay and elsewhere if they wanted to. Could they create a digital story titled, "What Does Singapore Mean to Me?" It ends very abruptly because I cut the last part off to protect his identity. I don't know what you make of that. But this is, at the time, Tommy was 13 years old, I think, a secondary one student in a normal academic class. We did the field trip to Clark Key, and he went away, and over, I think, a period of a week and a half maybe, he made that story understand. So, first of all, digital storytelling, DST, doesn't necessarily require explicit or prior technical, artistic, or academic expertise. This is a young man who was able to express very, I think, complex and nuanced understandings about his experiences in the world. He hardly had to speak a word, but he was able to show what he understood. He didn't have a lot of technical expertise. He only had a telephone that was strapped to his chest as he was walking around. And certainly we would argue as educators that the digital arts, filmmaking in particular, but also some other drama techniques that we haven't had a chance to talk about this evening, help us to move beyond written and spoken words as the unquestioned starting points for narratives. Many times in school, for example, teachers will begin by telling their students to write notes about the stories that they want to tell. And the problem with that is that some students are not good at writing notes. They don't know how to put their thoughts into written form. And they can spend hours looking at a blank sheet, and they will get labelled as being slow or sort of inattentive because they can't express their ideas in written words. But if you ask students, we've found to draw a picture or to take a photograph or to go and film something, they can immediately generate ideas quickly because it's not in some senses, it's a non-linguistic form. Finally, what these stories tend to do here is that they allow students to have a lot more confidence in the work that they're doing. I think that they feel valued for the work that they have produced, and it helps them to transform as students and learners. Students' experiences can be put into what some people have called big time. Big time, in some senses, contrasts starkly with small time. Small time is about the here and now. It's about what's happening now. There's no need for you to make any kind of references to history or to culture or to society. When you compress all of this storytelling into a small space of time, what happens is that all of the stories end up looking and sounding the same. And what happens when you allow students to look at things over a longer stretch of time and space, like we did with Tommy, every student's story is a different story because they're drawing on their personal experiences. What about the substance and the truth? Where is it? Doesn't one story just lead to the next and the next one and the next one after that? Where's the progression in that? What's the point of it all? In the end, wouldn't all stories just be alike? But I think that one way of looking at storytelling that's markedly different from that is it's a very complex, socially constructed act. Storytellers have important histories to tell based on their past experiences and what they know in the present, and also, by implication, about what they can say about the future. If stories are socially constructed, then they can no longer be individual enterprises. There's something that makes sense to who we are as human beings because of the stories that we tell. But, as I said already, storytelling, especially narrative writing, is often viewed as a static academic exercise for the explicit purposes of developing literacy skills. What results, as I've already mentioned, is that the stories that get told are all about the here and now, that they don't have a big perspective, and that the stories that are told are privatized and they're very product oriented. We just need to work towards the telling of the story, the writing of the story. And we're teachers and we're educators and we're educational researchers, but I believe that storytelling is something that applies to all professions and walks of life. We all need stories, and we are stories. I think that if we reframe digital storytelling, and I think that this is something that we should do, we can reframe it as being constructive and transformative as a way of learning communication in any field. If we look at stories in this more constructive, transformative mode of operation, there can be no such thing as a good or a bad story. All stories are potentially are good because they lead to something else. What I'd like to do now is to invite my friend and colleague and research partner, Rethi, to join me. When you look at Tommy's story, can you see any more in it now than you saw then?
I see that he wasn't desiring to please me, the teacher, because I'm the first audience. He wasn't worried about my judgment and how I would feel about the political correctness of his story. And to me now that actually means more, because my objective then as the teacher, and I was using drama and digital storytelling, was to create a safe space where they could authentically tell me something without fear. And he did that. So when I look at it now, I realized as a student how much of trust he had to have in me in order to speak like that. And so I actually appreciate his honesty more now. I still feel strongly about how the classroom should be, how it should look like. But I think I now begin to appreciate the difficulties a teacher has in trying to create that kind of space. Now that I'm out of it and I have the helicopter view, I'm looking in, it's not easy.